There are mornings when you wake and wonder how the sun still rises when you've forgotten how to rise with it. Those quiet moments when you look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman looking back. Sometimes, the greatest journey isn't across oceans or mountaintops. It's the path back to yourself after you've given pieces of your heart away until your chest feels hollow. I see you there, standing at the crossroads of everybody else's needs, wondering when you began to speak your own desires in whispers. Have you ever stood in a crowded room, surrounded by voices calling your name, yet feeling as if you're disappearing with each response? I know that feeling. The way your hands are always reaching to soothe a child's forehead, reaching to hold someone else's dreams, reaching until your arms ache with the weight of everyone but yourself. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from giving too much. It's not the tired that sleep can touch. It's deeper than bone. It's the fatigue of a soul that has poured itself out without remembering to refill. I remember the day I realized I had become an empty vessel. I was standing in my kitchen, making dinner for a family that had grown accustomed to my sacrifice. The potatoes were boiling, steam rising like the ghosts of all my unspoken needs. And suddenly, I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten something simply because it brought me joy, not because it was practical or someone else's favorite. That's often how it begins, these small surrenders we hardly notice. A preference here, a dream there, until one day we're living in houses decorated with everyone else's choices. We become experts at anticipating others' needs while our own gather dust in corners we no longer visit. You see, giving is beautiful, sacred even, but somewhere along the way, perhaps we weren't told the whole truth, that nurturing others requires that we first nurture ourselves, not as an act of selfishness, but as a necessity, like the oxygen mask they tell you to secure on yourself before helping others. I watch women like us, women who know the weight of responsibility, women whose shoulders have carried decades of expectations. We walk through life as though our worth is measured by how much we can bear before breaking, as if the emptier we become, the more we have somehow proven our love. But listen to me now, sister. An empty vessel makes no music. The world needs your song, not just your service. Your joy, not just your sacrifice. Your presence, not just your presence. This emptiness you feel isn't failure. It's your soul's quiet rebellion against being forgotten. That hollow space inside isn't something to fear or fill hastily with more noise and obligation. It's speaking to you in the language of absence, telling you what you've been missing. Tonight, I invite you to place a hand over your heart and feel its rhythm. That beating is not just keeping you alive for others. It's playing the music of your own precious life, a melody that deserves to be heard, especially by you. The journey back begins with recognition, with standing in this emptiness and acknowledging it without shame. Yes, you have given until the giving hollowed you, but emptiness also creates space, and in that space, something new can begin to grow. Remember, dearest one, even the moon knows when to wane, when to retreat into darkness, to gather herself before she shines again. You are no less celestial, no less deserving of your cycles of replenishment. This emptiness is not your ending. It's the necessary clearing before your beginning. There's a particular sound that giving makes when it comes from an empty place. Like footsteps in an abandoned house, each step echoing back the absence rather than the presence. I've heard this sound in my own voice, felt it in my hands as they moved mechanically through acts of service that once brought me joy. Do you remember when your giving had a different sound? When it rang with purpose and pleasure rather than obligation and exhaustion? When yes was a choice rather than a reflex? I remember. And somewhere inside, beneath layers of fatigue and forgotten dreams, so do you. The world teaches women like us strange mathematics, that somehow, by dividing ourselves among everyone we love, we become more, not less. That sacrifice equals worthiness. that our capacity to endure depletion is somehow a measure of our love's authenticity. I once knew a woman who baked cookies every Sunday for 40 years. Her grandchildren expected them, her church counted on them, her neighbors anticipated them. One Sunday, her hands aching with arthritis, she didn't bake. The phone calls came concerned, surprised, some even indignant. "Are you ill?" they asked. Not, "What do you need?" or "How long have your hands been hurting?" Just the hollow echo of expectation. This is how we lose ourselves. Not in one dramatic moment of surrender, but in 1,000 tiny expectations we absorb until they become our skin, until saying no feels like betrayal, and our own desires feel like selfishness. The most dangerous part? We begin to believe it. We mistake the hollow for holy. We convince ourselves that emptiness is noble, that the echoing sound of our own neglected needs is somehow the music of martyrdom, beautiful in its sacrifice. But listen carefully to those echoes now. In their emptiness is a message. You were never meant to be a hollow vessel. You were designed with depth and dimension, with chambers of joy and sorrow, desire and rest, giving and receiving. All of these rooms inside you matter. I've sat with women who speak of their children, their partners, their aging parents, their communities with such tenderness, their eyes soft with love, their voices warm with care. Yet when asked about themselves, a strange flatness enters their gaze, as if they're trying to remember a language they once knew but have long forgotten how to speak. This forgetting happens so gradually, we become fluent in everyone else's hunger while our own appetite turns to whispers. We learn the language of others' dreams while our own fade to murmurs too soft to hear. The hollowness grows familiar, comfortable even, at least in its certainty. We know how to navigate its echoing halls. We understand its rules. But comfort is not the same as joy. Familiarity is not fulfillment. Remember how it feels to want something purely for yourself, not because it makes you more productive or more valuable to others, not because it checks a box of self-care that lets you return to giving, but because it lights something within you that is yours alone to tend. The journey back to yourself begins with listening differently to these hollow echoes, not as proof of your virtue, but as signals calling you home. Each empty space within you is not just absence, it's possibility. Each echo is not just loss, it's invitation. Tonight, as you move through the rituals of care you perform for others, listen for that hollowness. Don't turn away from it. Don't rush to fill it with noise or numbing or more doing. Just acknowledge its presence. I hear you. You might whisper to it, I know you're there. In that simple recognition, something shifts. The first stone on the path back to yourself is turned, not a dramatic leap, but a gentle noticing, a quiet promise that next time you'll listen a little longer, that you'll begin to follow the echoes back to their source, back to you. Have you ever caught your reflection in a window or mirror and startled, not recognizing yourself for a moment? Not because you've changed physically, though time certainly leaves its tender marks upon us all, but because somewhere along the way you stopped truly seeing yourself. This is the paradox of the invisible woman. Everyone sees what you do, the lunches packed, the appointments remembered, the birthdays celebrated, the crises averted. They see your hands in motion, your body present, but they don't see you, and slowly, imperceptibly, you stop seeing yourself too. I remember sitting at a dinner table years ago, surrounded by family. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I nodded, smiled, asked questions about everyone's day. I refilled glasses without being asked, noticed when the bread was running low before anyone mentioned it. I was so present for everyone else that I disappeared. Later that night, someone mentioned something I'd apparently said during dinner, a comment about a book I'd been reading. I had no memory of speaking those words, of being seen as more than just the hands that served and the ears that listened. I had become so practiced at disappearance that even I couldn't find myself in that room. This invisibility isn't something others do to us, though the world certainly conspires in it. It's something we learn to do to ourselves. We are taught that humility means taking up less space, that generosity means becoming background rather than foreground, that love means transparency, becoming the glass through which others see their own lives more clearly. But a woman who cannot be seen eventually cannot see, cannot witness her own life unfolding, cannot honor her own journey. The invisible woman moves through rooms, fulfilling functions rather than expressing essence. She becomes all verb and no noun, all action and no being. The cruelest part of this invisibility is how it masks itself as virtue. How often have we been praised for our selflessness? As if the goal of a woman's life is to achieve the state of selfless, to exist without a self at all, as if our worth increases as our presence decreases. I know women who speak of themselves only in relation to others, someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's colleague. Their identities, like satellites, defined by what they orbit rather than their own gravity. When asked directly about themselves, they grow uncomfortable, changing the subject quickly back to familiar territory, everyone else. But you were born with a name of your own. Before you were anyone's anything, you were yourself. A complete being with desires that didn't need justification, with dreams that didn't require permission, with a voice that wasn't measured for its usefulness to others. That woman still exists. She hasn't vanished, she's veiled. Behind years of putting others first, behind the fear that claiming space might mean losing love, behind the exhaustion that makes it easier to disappear than to declare your presence. Becoming visible again begins with the smallest acts of witness. Notice the thoughts you push aside, the desires you dismiss as impractical or unimportant, the opinions you swallow before they reach your lips. These are all parts of yourself asking to be seen, first and most importantly, by you. Try this. Speak your full name aloud when you're alone, not as identity or introduction, but as invocation. Call yourself back into being. Remind yourself that you exist beyond function, beyond relation, beyond use. You exist as yourself. The path back to visibility isn't about demanding attention from others. It's about returning your attention to yourself. It's about looking into that mirror and truly seeing not just how you appear to the world, but who you are beneath appearances. Not just the woman who gives, but the woman who is. Because the truth is, dearest one, you were never meant to disappear. Your invisibility serves no one, not even those you love most. The world needs women who occupy their space unapologetically, who model self-possession alongside compassion, who demonstrate that loving others doesn't require vanishing. The most powerful gift you can offer is your whole self, fully seen. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she looks around and wonders where parts of herself have gone. Like items lent and never returned, a favorite book given to a friend, a cherished sweater loaned to a daughter, a dream shared with a partner who held it carelessly. We find ourselves standing in the center of our lives, taking inventory of all we've given away. This scattering happens so gradually that we hardly notice. A boundary relaxed here, a desire deferred there. The time for your morning meditation given to making someone else's breakfast. The corner where you used to write surrendered to storage for others' belongings. The music you loved that slowly stopped playing because it didn't fit the household's preferences. I remember realizing one spring that I hadn't planted my favorite flowers in years. Purple irises that reminded me of my grandmother's garden. Somewhere along the way, I'd switched to plants that were more practical, less prone to disease, better suited to the climate, all logical reasons that had nothing to do with what made my heart sing when I looked out the window. That's when I understood. It wasn't just objects or spaces I'd surrendered. It was pieces of joy, fragments of identity, slivers of my own particular magic. I had scattered myself like seeds without waiting for the blooming. This scattering isn't carelessness. It's an act of love, yes, but love misdirected. We are taught that love means placing others at the center, that generosity means giving all parts of ourselves away, that compromise means always being the one to bend. And so we bend and bend until our shape becomes unrecognizable, even to ourselves. The art of reclaiming begins with recognition, with naming what's been lost or given away. This isn't about blame, neither of others nor yourself. It's about honest witnessing, about standing in the center of your life and saying, this part of me has been missing and I feel its absence. Perhaps it's something tangible, a creative practice abandoned, a friendship neglected, a physical space surrendered. Or perhaps it's something less visible but equally vital, your voice in family decisions, your right to emotional privacy, your permission to change and grow in ways that might inconvenience others. Reclaiming isn't taking back so much as it is calling back. It's remembering that these scattered pieces of yourself were never truly gone, just temporarily housed elsewhere, sometimes in places that no longer serve their purpose or honor their worth. I've watched women begin this reclamation in ways both small and profound. A mother who reclaims her name after years of being called only mom. A wife who reclaims a room in the house as her exclusive domain after decades of shared spaces. A caregiver who reclaims 1 hour each day that belongs to no one but herself. These acts aren't selfish, they're sacred. They're not about diminishing your love for others, but about remembering that you too deserve to be loved first and most faithfully by yourself. Start with something small, something that feels like it has your name written on it in invisible ink. Maybe it's a type of tea you stopped drinking because no one else in the house enjoyed it. Maybe it's a color you stopped wearing because someone once made a thoughtless comment. Maybe it's an opinion you stopped voicing because keeping peace felt more important than speaking truth. Call it back to you with gentleness. Not as a grabbing or a demand, but as a remembering. This belongs to me, you might whisper. This is part of who I am. The beautiful paradox is this. As you reclaim these scattered pieces, you become more generous, not less. Because true giving can only come from wholeness, from a self that is gathered rather than dispersed. You cannot offer authentically what you do not possess. Think of it as creating a home within yourself, a place where all parts of you are welcome to return, to rest, to be recognized as essential. Some pieces may come back changed by their time away. Some may need healing or dusting off. Some may no longer fit the woman you've become. That's the gift of this gathering. You get to choose what to keep, what to release, what to transform, not based on others' expectations or needs, but on your own deep knowing of what makes you most fully alive. The woman who reclaims herself becomes a lighthouse rather than a harbor, illuminating the way for others while remaining steadfast in her own ground. There is a moment, and oh, how I wish I could be there to witness it with you, when something shifts, like the almost imperceptible change in light that signals dawn before the sun appears. A moment when you draw a breath that feels somehow different from all the breaths that came before. This is the breath of recognition, of seeing yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years, not as a role or a function or a relationship, but as a soul housed in a body, moving through time, carrying stories and scars and wisdom uniquely your own. For me, this breath came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was watering plants by a window, watching how the leaves turned toward light without apology or explanation. And suddenly, I recognized something. I too had been reaching toward what I needed, but with such hesitation, such qualification, always with one eye on whether my reaching might inconvenience someone else. In that moment, I saw myself with startling clarity, not just the woman I'd become, shaped by years of accommodation and careful self-diminishment, but the woman still alive beneath those layers. The one who knew what she wanted, the one who could reach directly, without first calculating the cost to everyone around her. This breath of recognition isn't always gentle. Sometimes it comes as a gasp, a sudden awareness that you've been underwater for so long you forgot the taste of air. Sometimes it comes as a sob, breaking through a dam of composure that held back years of unacknowledged grief for the self that was set aside. However it comes, this breath changes everything. Not outwardly, perhaps. Your life may look exactly the same the day after this recognition as it did the day before. But inwardly, something fundamental has shifted. You have remembered that you exist, not just as a reference point for others' lives, but as the protagonist of your own unfolding story. I've heard women describe this moment in different ways. One said it felt like putting on glasses after years of blurred vision. Another said it was like hearing her name called across a crowded room in a voice she recognized from childhood. Another described it as a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten was there. The details differ, but the essence remains. Something dormant awakens. Something forgotten is remembered. Something overlooked becomes suddenly, unmistakably visible. This recognition doesn't mean you know immediately how to proceed, how to reorganize your life around this awakened awareness. It doesn't provide a map for the journey back to yourself. It simply confirms that such a journey is necessary, that despite all the love you've given, all the care you've provided, that despite all the love you've given, all the care you've provided, all the ways you've shaped yourself to fit the contours of others' needs, there remains a fundamental truth: you matter. Not because of what you give or do or manage or solve. You matter simply because you are. This recognition carries with it both relief and responsibility. Relief because you no longer need to justify your existence through usefulness. Responsibility because once you've seen yourself clearly, you cannot unsee. Once you've remembered your own value, you must begin the gentle work of living as if you believe it. This breath of recognition often brings questions that have no easy answers. How do I honor myself without abandoning others? How do I create space for my needs after years of pushing them aside? What parts of my current life truly reflect who I am? And what parts were chosen from obligation rather than authenticity? These questions aren't meant to be answered in a single moment of clarity. They're invitations to a new way of moving through the world with awareness, with intention, with a commitment to including yourself in the circle of your own care. The breath of recognition is not about dramatic rebellion or sudden upheaval. It's rarely about walking away from the life you've built. More often, it's about walking back into that life as a more complete version of yourself. About bringing your whole self to the relationships and responsibilities you've chosen, rather than only the parts deemed useful or acceptable. I remember a woman who, after decades of cooking what her family preferred, began making herself a separate meal once a week, featuring foods she loved but no one else enjoyed. Such a small act of self-acknowledgement, yet her children spoke of how it changed their understanding of her, how they saw her more clearly as a person with preferences and pleasures all her own. Another woman, after her breath of recognition, started speaking in first person again. She noticed how she had fallen into the habit of saying "we," even when expressing purely personal opinions or experiences. We liked that restaurant when only she had enjoyed it. We think it's too expensive when only she felt that way. Reclaiming the I in her speech gave others permission to disagree with her, to have their own separate experiences, and paradoxically, this created more authentic connection. The most beautiful outcome of this recognition is how it ripples outward. When you begin to see yourself clearly, you develop keener vision for others too. You recognize when someone is diminishing themselves in ways you once did. You notice the unique light in people that has nothing to do with what they provide. You become both witness and mirror, reflecting back to others their intrinsic worth because you've remembered your own. This breath of recognition isn't something you take once and are done with. It's a practice of remembering that must be renewed again and again. Some days the remembering comes easily. Other days, old habits of self-forgetting reassert themselves, and you must gently call yourself back. But each time you return to this awareness, each time you draw this breath that acknowledges your own existence as necessary and valuable, the path back to yourself becomes a little clearer, a little more worn with use. Until one day, perhaps, it becomes the most natural way home. There is an art to coming back to yourself. It requires the patience of a gardener who understands that growth cannot be rushed, that some seeds need darkness before they can reach toward light, that tender shoots need protection as they find their strength. This garden of return must be tended with extraordinary gentleness. After all, you are coaxing back to life parts of yourself that have been dormant, perhaps for decades, desires that learn to sleep rather than face repeated disappointment, boundaries that softened and blurred from lack of reinforcement, joys that were set aside as impractical or indulgent in the face of everyone else's more pressing needs. I learned this gentleness the hard way. After my own awakening, my first instinct was impatience with myself. Why had I allowed my own erasure? Why had I participated in my disappearance? Why couldn't I immediately reclaim all I had surrendered? This harsh questioning only led to shame, and shame is never fertile ground for growth. The gentler questions proved more fruitful. What small pleasure might I reintroduce today? What tiny boundary might I establish? What forgotten dream still has enough ember glow to be worth fanning back to flame? This return happens in increments so small they might seem insignificant to anyone watching. The 5 minutes of solitude before others wake. The book kept by your bedside that speaks to your soul rather than your obligations. The walk taken at a pace that suits your contemplation rather than someone else's schedule. The opinion voiced quietly but without apology. Each of these moments is a seed planted, a tender green shoot breaking through soil. Each deserves your protection and celebration. I remember planting literal seeds during my own journey back marigolds in a small pot by my kitchen window. They weren't practical or impressive. They weren't anyone's favorite but mine. Their only purpose was to bloom, to bring color, to remind me daily that beauty for its own sake is reason enough for existence. Each morning as I watered them, I whispered encouragement, not just to the growing plants, but to the growing awareness within me. Take your time, I would say. You don't have to bloom all at once, just a little more each day. This garden of return requires regular tending. The world has a way of encroaching, of suggesting that your small plot of self-nurturing is expendable when more urgent matters arise. It will always present reasons why today is not the day for your needs, your growth, your healing. This is when you must become the guardian of your garden, not with aggression or defensiveness, but with quiet determination, with the calm certainty of a woman who knows that her flourishing is not separate from her capacity to give. It is the very source of genuine generosity. I've watched women create beautiful rituals of return. One kept a journal where she wrote one sentence each night, just one, that reflected a thought that was entirely her own, unconnected to her roles or responsibilities. Another set her watch to chime softly each hour, a reminder to check in with herself, to notice her own presence in her life. A woman in her 70s told me she began singing again after 50 years of silence. Not for an audience, not even particularly well, she admitted with a laugh. But her voice, rusty with disuse, carried melodies that had been waiting half a century to be expressed. The simple act of making sound that served no purpose except her own joy brought tears to her eyes the first time she allowed it. These gardens of return look different for each woman. For some, they're filled with creativity long deferred. For others, with physical pleasures, movement, or rest. texture, or taste. For others still, with intellectual pursuits or spiritual practices that reconnect them to their deeper knowing. What they share is intention, the conscious choice to cultivate rather than abandon these tender new growths, to protect them from the trampling of old habits and external demands, to trust their natural wisdom about what needs sun and what needs shade, what needs support and what needs space. As your garden grows, as you remember how to nurture yourself with the same attention you've given to others, you'll discover something remarkable. The boundaries between giving and receiving begin to dissolve. Self-care no longer feels like something separate from caring for those you love. It becomes clear that the most authentic gifts you offer others grow directly from your own well-tended soil. This garden becomes not a retreat from the world, but the place from which you engage with it more truly. Not an escape from responsibility, but the ground that makes meaningful choice possible. Not a rejection of love, but its deepest source. There is a mirror waiting for you. Not the bathroom mirror that shows only surface reflections, the lines earned through laughter and worry, the hair that may have changed from its original color, the eyes that have witnessed both joy and sorrow. No, this is a deeper mirror, one that reflects the entirety of who you are beneath appearances. I call it the sacred mirror, for it shows what is holy in you, what is whole, undivided, essential. Looking into this mirror requires courage. After years of seeing yourself primarily through others' eyes, primarily in relation to what you provide, the unfiltered truth of your own being can feel almost too bright to bear. My first encounter with this sacred mirror came unexpectedly. I was alone on a beach at dawn, watching waves erase and rewrite the shore with each patient cycle. No one needed anything from me. No one was waiting for my return. In that rare emptiness, a question arose. Who am I when no one is looking, when no one is asking, when no one is expecting? The silence that followed was terrifying at first, then strangely peaceful, like stepping into a room I'd always owned but rarely entered, a space that existed regardless of whether I occupied it. My essential self, waiting patiently for recognition. This sacred mirror reflects truths both comfortable and challenging. It shows your inherent dignity, your natural wisdom, your capacity for joy that requires no justification. But it also reveals the habits of self-abandonment you've developed, the ways you've learned to look away from your own knowing, the moments when you've betrayed your deeper truth for temporary peace or external approval. All of it belongs. All of it is part of the woman you've become. The sacred mirror does not judge, it simply reflects, with perfect accuracy, what is. Looking into this mirror is not a one-time event, but a practice. At first, you might manage only glimpses before turning away, overwhelmed by its clarity. That's natural. We've been conditioned to focus outward for so long that sustained attention to our inner landscape can feel almost transgressive. Yet with each return to this reflection, something healing happens. You begin to recognize yourself more quickly, to feel at home in your own company, to trust what you see rather than what you've been told to see. I know women who create literal sacred mirrors for themselves, special times and spaces reserved for this deep self-witnessing. One sits in silence for 10 minutes each morning before her household wakes, asking herself, "What is true for me today?" Another walks alone in nature each week, listening to the voice that speaks when no one else is present to be pleased or managed. Another writes letters to herself, addressed from the wisdom of her 80-year-old self to the woman she is now, full of perspective and compassion. The form matters less than the intention. To see yourself completely, without the distortions of others' expectations or your own habitual self-criticism. To witness both your magnificence and your humanity with equal clarity and acceptance. This mirror gazing reveals something surprising. The parts of yourself you've been most afraid to acknowledge, your anger, your desire, your grief. Your needs are not monstrous at all when brought into the light. They are simply energies asking for recognition, information about what matters to you, guidance toward greater wholeness. I remember the first time I allowed myself to fully feel my rage at how easily my boundaries were crossed, how reflexively my needs were set aside. In the sacred mirror of honest self-witnessing, this anger didn't make me unlovable or dangerous. It simply highlighted where healing was needed, where greater truth-telling was required, where my yes and no needed to regain their proper weight. The sacred mirror also reflects beauty you may have forgotten or never fully acknowledged, the loyalty with which you've loved, even when it cost you, the courage with which you've faced loss and change, the wisdom you've gathered not in spite of but because of your struggles, the unique melody your life plays that cannot be replicated by any other. This mirror becomes a touchstone, a place of return when the world's messages about your worth or purpose become too loud, too distorted. It offers a reality check against the subtle and not so subtle demands that you contort yourself to fit external expectations. The woman who knows her own reflection in the sacred mirror walks differently in the world, not with arrogance or indifference to others, but with a quiet certainty about her own boundaries and values. She can engage more authentically because she's no longer auditioning for approval or acceptance. She already knows who she is, has already accepted her whole self, has already recognized her own worth. This is perhaps the deepest homecoming of all, not to a place or a relationship or a role, but to the truth of your own being, reflected with perfect clarity in the sacred mirror of self-recognition. There comes a moment in this journey back to yourself when you must face a difficult truth. You have participated in your own disappearance, not maliciously, not consciously, but consistently in 1,000 small surrenders that seem necessary or noble or simply easier than the alternative. This realization can bring a wave of regret so powerful it threatens to pull you under. Why didn't I speak up sooner? How could I have forgotten myself so completely? Who might I have been if I had honored my own knowing from the beginning? These questions, asked with judgment rather than curiosity, become stones in your pockets, weighing you down just as you're learning to float again. This is where self-forgiveness becomes not just helpful but essential, the gentle hand extended to pull you back to shore when regret threatens to drown you. I remember sitting alone one evening, surrounded by journals I'd kept sporadically over decades. Reading my own words, the dreams deferred, the boundaries crossed, the needs expressed and then immediately denied, I felt a sorrow so acute it physically hurt. Not just for what I'd lost, but for how I'd abandoned myself time and again, becoming complicit in my own erasure. In that moment of painful clarity, I heard a whisper from the deepest part of myself. You did what you knew how to do. You survived. You loved. You did your best with the awareness you had. This wasn't about absolving myself of responsibility or denying the cost of my choices. It was about recognizing a simple truth. Harshness toward my past self would not help my present self heal. Only tenderness could do that, the same tenderness I had so readily offered others but withheld from myself. Self-forgiveness isn't about pretending the past doesn't matter. It's about holding it differently with compassion rather than condemnation, with understanding of context rather than isolation of actions. It's about recognizing that the woman who made those choices was doing the best she could with the tools she had, navigating cultural expectations and relationship dynamics that made self-honor seem like selfishness. This forgiveness happens in layers, like peeling an onion. Each time you think you've reached its core, another level of self-judgment reveals itself, asking for the same gentle attention. The judgment that says you should have known better. The judgment that says you wasted precious years. The judgment that says others managed to maintain themselves, so your surrender was weakness rather than adaptation. Each of these judgments, when met with kindness rather than agreement, gradually loses its power to define you. Each becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding rather than deeper shame. I know a woman who created a ritual of self-forgiveness on her 60th birthday. She wrote letters to herself at different ages, 20, 30, 40, 50, acknowledging the specific challenges each version of herself had faced, the wisdom each had developed, the gifts each had given. She read these letters aloud beside a river, then released rose petals into the current for each decade, watching them float away in the gentle current of acceptance. Another woman I know keeps what she calls a forgiveness stone in her pocket, a small, smooth river rock that she holds when self-judgment arises. The physical sensation anchors her in the present moment, reminding her that while she cannot change the past, she can change how she carries it. These rituals matter because self-forgiveness is not a one-time decision, but an ongoing practice. The habit of self-blame runs deep, especially for women taught that self-sacrifice is the highest expression of love. Dismantling this belief requires patience, repetition, and concrete reminders of a new way of relating to yourself. As you practice this forgiveness, something miraculous happens. You become more gentle not only with yourself, but with others. You recognize how we all struggle with the same fundamental human challenge: how to remain true to ourselves while in relationship, how to maintain boundaries without building walls, how to give genuinely rather than from obligation. This compassionate understanding doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or staying in situations that diminish you. Quite the opposite. True self-forgiveness clarifies where healing is needed, where patterns must change, where greater truth-telling is required. But it approaches these changes from love rather than recrimination, from wisdom rather than woundedness. The whispers of self-forgiveness sound different for each woman, but their essence is the same. You are human. You are learning. Your worth was never determined by your perfection. Your value was never measured by your usefulness. You have always been deserving of your own compassion, your own understanding, your own tender regard. Listen for these whispers. They are not weakness or self-indulgence. They are the very foundation upon which your return to yourself is built, the soft ground that supports new growth, new choices, new ways of being in relationship with yourself and others. The woman who forgives herself walks lighter in the world, not because she denies responsibility, but because she carries it with grace rather than guilt. Not because she forgets the past, but because she relates to it as teacher rather than judge. Not because she is perfect, but because she no longer expects herself to be. There comes a point in your journey home when you realize that returning to yourself isn't about recovering some fixed, pristine state that existed before you began giving yourself away. It's about weaving a new tapestry from both old and new threads, taking what remains from your past, adding what you're discovering in your present, and creating a pattern that has never existed before. This weaving is an act of creation, not restoration. You are not simply becoming who you were before life's demands and expectations shaped you. You are becoming who you are now, informed by all you've experienced, all you've learned, all you've survived. I remember the moment this truth dawned on me. I had been searching for my original self, as if there existed some untouched essence that I could simply dust off and re-inhabit. But sitting quietly one afternoon, watching light shift through leaves, I understood. There is no going back, only going forward with greater awareness. The woman I was at 20, at 30, at 40, she no longer exists except in memory. The woman I am now contains echoes of her, yes, but also contains wisdom she could never have imagined. This realization brings both grief and liberation. Grief for the simpler self who existed before compromise and complexity. Liberation from the impossible task of trying to erase the impact of years lived, choices made, paths taken and not taken. The new tapestry you weave incorporates threads that may seem contradictory: strength and vulnerability, boundaries and openness, solitude and connection. It includes colors you've always loved but forgot to include, and new hues you're just discovering appeal to you. It has both carefully planned patterns and surprising improvisations that emerged in the weaving itself. This tapestry is never finished. That's another liberating truth. You are not working towards some final, perfect version of yourself that will never change. You are engaged in an ongoing creation, responding to life as it unfolds, incorporating new threads as they present themselves, letting certain patterns fade as others become more prominent. I've watched women weave these new tapestries in ways both subtle and profound. A teacher who, after 30 years of nurturing others' children, began taking art classes not to become a professional artist, but to experience the pure pleasure of creating without outcome or evaluation. A mother who, as her children left home, reclaimed her birth name and introduced herself anew to the world. A widow who, after decades of partnership, discovered solitary travel, finding in it not lonely emptiness, but spacious possibility. Each of these women face the same essential questions. What threads from my past still feel true and vital? What new colors am I drawn to now? What patterns emerge when I weave with full awareness rather than habitual response? Answering these questions isn't about dramatic reinvention. It's rarely about leaving your life behind or rejecting everything that came before. It's more often about subtle shifts in emphasis, small recalibrations of attention, gentle reintroductions of forgotten pleasures alongside new discoveries. This weaving requires both honoring and releasing. Honoring the woman you've been, the choices she made with the awareness she had, the wisdom she gathered through experience, and releasing the expectation that you must continue patterns that no longer serve simply because they're familiar or because others have grown accustomed to them. One woman described this process as editing my life with love, keeping what resonates with her deepest truth, letting go of what doesn't, adding new elements with conscious intention, not from rejection or reactivity, but from the quiet authority of a woman who knows herself well enough to recognize what belongs in her tapestry and what doesn't. The most beautiful aspect of this weaving is how it reveals connections you couldn't see before, how a childhood passion abandoned decades ago links to a new interest emerging now, how a strength developed through difficulty becomes the foundation for unexpected joy, how even periods of self-forgetting contributed necessary threads to the woman you're becoming. Nothing is wasted in this tapestry. Even the painful threads, the dark colors, the tangled sections where you lost your way, all become part of a whole that could not exist without each element. This doesn't romanticize suffering or justify mistreatment. It simply acknowledges that everything you've experienced has contributed to who you are now, capable of weaving with greater consciousness than ever before. As your tapestry takes shape, you'll notice something surprising. Others can see it too. Not everyone, perhaps. Some may be too invested in the old pattern to recognize or welcome the new. But those with eyes to see will notice the change in you not as absence or loss, but as presence and becoming. They will sense the deeper authenticity in your voice, the clearer boundaries in your choices, the more genuine quality of your giving. They will respond to the woman who is emerging, thread by thread, choice by choice, day by day, the woman who is neither who she was nor who others expected her to be, but magnificently, particularly herself. This is the paradox at the heart of coming home to yourself. Only by accepting that you can never go back can you truly move forward. Only by releasing the search for some lost, untarnished self can you discover the woman you are now, complex, multi-layered, woven from countless threads into a pattern that has never existed before and will never exist again. The journey back to yourself doesn't end with trumpets or fireworks. There is no finish line to cross. No summit moment when you plant a flag and declare yourself completely found. Instead, there is a quieter recognition, a sense of having traveled a great distance while never leaving the ground beneath your feet. This is the gentle homecoming, not to some idealized state of perfect self-possession, but to the ongoing practice of presence, of showing up for your own life with the same faithfulness you've shown to others, of inhabiting each moment not just as witness or facilitator, but as full participant. I remember a morning when this homecoming felt particularly clear to me. I was sitting in my garden, coffee cooling beside me, watching birds gather at a feeder. Nothing extraordinary was happening. No great revelation or emotional breakthrough. Just the simple experience of being present in my own life without dividing my attention, without mentally rehearsing my next tasks, without feeling that I should be doing something more useful with this time. In that ordinary moment, I recognized a profound shift. I was no longer striving to find myself. I was simply being myself. The searching had quieted. The coming home had already happened, so gradually, I hardly noticed its completion. This gentle homecoming reveals itself in small moments of congruence, when your outer actions align with your inner knowing, when you can say yes or no without excessive explanation or apology, when you can receive care as gracefully as you give it, when you can stand in disagreement without abandoning either your truth or your compassion. It shows itself in how you move through the world, not with the hesitancy of someone unsure of her right to exist, nor with the rigidity of someone defending territory, but with the natural dignity of a woman who knows both her value and her interconnectedness with all life. This homecoming isn't a static achievement, but a dynamic balance, continuously recalibrated as life presents new challenges, new relationships, new circumstances that test your remembering. There will still be days when you forget, when old patterns reassert themselves, when the habit of self-abandonment feels easier than the courage of self-presence. But these forgettings become briefer, the return to remembering more natural, like a compass needle that may wobble but always finds its way back to true north. You develop an inner orientation toward your own center that becomes increasingly reliable, increasingly trustworthy. I've witnessed this gentle homecoming in women across decades of life. A grandmother who, at 80, finally claimed her right to expression after a lifetime of careful speech. A mother who found her voice in writing after years of believing her stories weren't important enough to tell. A wife who rediscovered physical pleasure after decades of disconnect from her own body. Each of these women spoke not of dramatic transformation, but of quiet recognition. Not, "I've become someone new, but I've remembered who I've always been." Not, "I've found the answer, but I've learned to trust the questions." Not, "I've reached my destination, but I've made peace with the journey." This homecoming changes how you experience time. The past is no longer a source of regret, but a landscape of learning, rich with experiences that shaped but do not define you. The future is no longer a promise of eventual fulfillment, but an open field of possibility, approached with curiosity rather than anxiety. And the present becomes increasingly habitable, a place you can occupy fully rather than merely pass through on your way to somewhere else. Your relationships change too, not necessarily in their external forms, though some may shift as you become more authentic. But in their internal quality, the level of truth you can speak and hear, the boundaries you can maintain without defensiveness, the love you can offer that comes from fullness rather than obligation. Perhaps most profoundly, your relationship with yourself changes. The inner critic who has accompanied you for so long, questioning your worth, measuring your performance, finding you perpetually lacking, gradually loses its authority. Not because you've achieved perfection, but because you've recognized that perfection was never the point. The point was presence. The point was truth. The point was love that includes rather than excludes yourself. In this gentle homecoming, you discover that the woman you've been seeking was never actually lost. She was present all along in your longings, in your discomforts, in your moments of unexpected joy, in your quiet knowing that there must be more than endless giving without replenishment. She was the voice whispering beneath the noise of should and must and ought. She was the question that had no answer except your own becoming. And now you recognize her not as separate from the woman you've been, but as her truest expression. Not as someone you must strive to be, but as someone you already are when you release the effort of being anyone else. This is the paradox at the heart of coming home. What you seek has always been seeking you. The journey back to yourself ends where it begins, in the simple, profound recognition that you are already home. You are already whole. You are already and have always been worthy of your own tender regard. The gentle homecoming isn't about arriving somewhere new. It's about seeing differently the place where you already stand. It's about recognizing that the ground beneath your feet is holy, not because you finally found the right spot, but because you are standing on it, fully present, fully alive, fully yourself. It isn't the end. It's just the moment when you allow yourself to rest. And resting, too, is an act of love. In the quiet spaces between giving, in the gentle pauses between doing, you discover that coming back to yourself isn't a journey away from those you love. It's the foundation that makes your love more authentic, your presence more complete, your giving more sustainable. The path home is not marked by dramatic gestures or perfect clarity. It's paved with small moments of returning to your breath, to your body, to your knowing, to your truth. Each return easier than the last, each remembering quicker to arise, until one day you realize you haven't lost yourself in quite some time. The woman who forgot the way back to herself has become the woman who knows she is already home.